Hello and welcome everybody to today's Training Industry Leader Talk Measuring Learning Impact, sponsored by Biz Library, Litmos, SweetRush, and WhatFix. I'm Liz Spate, the Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's program. If you haven't already, please pull up your chat window and let us know where you are joining us from today. We will be using this chat window to interact with our speakers regarding any comments. And if you could, please plug those questions in the Q&A toolbar below. We will be addressing questions at the end of the session for Q&A, but do not hesitate to drop those throughout the session. At the end of your time here with us, you'll notice a short evaluation survey has popped open in another tab in your browser, and we appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you'll receive a follow-up email from us that will include the link to the on-demand sessions for your team. If this is your first time with Training Industry, we would love to welcome you. We exist to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D, like live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, membership, and our podcast. So visit us to learn more, but we would also love to hear about what you learned from today's session on social media. So please follow us on your favorite platform and let's continue the conversation. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers for our first session. Dr. Kyile Stefaniak is the Chief Learning Officer at Litmos. Her interests focus on professional development of L&D professionals and instructional design decision-making. She also serves as an Associate Professor in Learning, Design, and Technology program at the University of Georgia. This content represents the opinions of Jill, and it carries no endorsement of the University of Georgia. Kyile Stair is the Chief People Officer at Litmos, where she is dedicated to driving business success by building highly engaged, inclusive, and empowered teams. In her role, Kylie oversees the global HR organization and is responsible for all aspects of the company's people's strategy. And with that, ladies, take it away.
Thank you, Liz, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Happy to be here with you all today. I didn't put it in the chat, but I am joining today from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If anyone else is, I say hi to you all. And Jill, where are you joining from today?
I am joining from Athens, Georgia, and it's surprisingly cold today, which I don't like.
Yeah. It looks like a little bit of that throughout the chat around the weather. So welcome. We are really happy to be speaking with you all today around learning in the flow of work. And we'll be monitoring the chat throughout as we can keep up with it. But we will set a little bit of time aside at the end for the formal Q&A. So if you have very specific questions you want to go through at the end, please put them in the Q&A section specifically. Otherwise, we'll try and monitor the chat throughout. So today's conversation, we want to really touch on two main points and have a discussion around these two topics with all of you, and welcome interaction again in the chat and some thoughts and feedback that you may have as well on some of these topics. But first and foremost, how to incorporate learning in the flow of work, giving some examples, some ideas, having some conversation around how we maximize those learning outcomes through learning at work and in the flow of work. And then how are we measuring? So practical ways to measure our knowledge acquisition, measure job performance, and measure increased efficiency. And so spending a little bit of time talking through those topics today with you all. Before we dive into a poll that we'll go through here on the next slide, I think it's important just to ground ourselves in a little bit of data. And according to e-learning industry, 72% of organizations believe that using online learning creates a competitive advantage for their business. And I think it's important that we share this statistic and talk about online learning, because that's a lot of the ways in which we're learning nowadays, especially post-COVID, doing a lot more online learning than we maybe had in previous years. And nice to see that 72% of organizations believe that online learning creates a competitive advantage. In addition, e-learning, according to the Research Institute of America, e-learning can boost knowledge retention by 25 to 60%. And this is really because online learning materials generally are visually stimulating. They can tend to be more concise, and we'll go through micro learning here a little bit in a couple of slides, and generally more interactive as well, with features like gamification, quizzes, surveys, and all of that. So I'm just wanting to kind of ground ourselves a little bit in online learning as we talk about that component in learning in the flow of work today. Okay, so our poll question for the day, keep this open for probably about maybe 30 seconds or so. So get in there and answer for what maybe feels the best for you. Today, what is your biggest challenge when incorporating learning in the flow of work? We have a couple of options here, just single choice. We don't have an all of the above option, but is it measuring the impact of learning on job performance and efficiency? Finding the right tools and technology to support that learning? Maybe it's convincing leaders or getting the buy-in around learning initiatives for your organization. Or maybe you're just starting your journey and looking for ways to start learning in the flow of work. All right. So it looks like measuring the impact of learning on job performance and efficiency. We definitely have quite a few slides to go through that topic here later today. So ask questions as we go as well. And then we'll spend a little bit of time probably talking also about right tools and technology. And if we don't get to any of your other initiatives that maybe you want to ask questions about, you can put them in the chat as well. We can see if we can touch on them.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's any surprise that measuring is the biggest challenge that folks have reported today, because it's a common one. I think one of the challenges, and we'll speak to this in our presentation today too. It's just different ways in which we can get creative with presenting certain metrics, and presenting metrics that can be communicated to leadership to be able to establish and advocate for the role that L&D can serve within your organization. And we'll talk about that today. This is a particular learning in the workplace model that was developed in the 1980s by researchers at the Center for Creative Leadership. And it was really looking at where does learning occur in the workplace. And while this was done in the 1980s, it still rings true today. If you were to think about some of your own experiences, if you think about your own professional development, and you think about your colleagues that you work with. And with these facts, it's looking at this 70-20-10 framework where only 10% of learning occurs formally. And so this would be like where you're being sent to training, you're perhaps going through a series of e-learning modules, maybe you're participating in compliance training where there's assessments going on, metrics are being gathered. That only accounts for 10% of learning in the workplace. We then have 20%, which is social learning, and then 70%, which is on the job experience. And so we started noticing a shift even pre-COVID. If you were to look at like what workplace learning looked like about 20 years ago, we kind of had a lot of organizations where we're stopping, I know a long time ago, being sent off to training for 2 days, where you'd go off site to, perhaps it was your organization's training university. So you'd be out of the office for those days. We're not seeing that as much. And of course, even with the push to online learning, and we continue to see that during COVID, we've now started to see that people are continuing to do that post-COVID and looking at what's necessary for bringing people together or doing some of those offsite trainings. But what we've typically have seen in the last few years with workplace learning is more emphasis being placed on the job learning, on the job experience. So we're seeing terms like micro learnings, just-in-time learnings, and we'll talk about that today. But those are where you're thinking about where you're sitting at your desk and you're doing a task that perhaps you don't do that frequently. Maybe you only do it once or twice a year, and you're going, I don't remember where I'm supposed to go to do this, or I don't remember where I'm supposed to click to process this particular task or this particular form. And this is where we start seeing those moments of, I need training right now. We sometimes see that looking formal, where perhaps there's micro learnings coming up or there's job aids coming up. But then we also might see where you're calling over to your colleague who might be the expert in your department saying, hey, can you help me with this? Can you assist me with this? And so that's where we're starting to see some of that on the job informal learning taking place. We also see that 20% of social learning, and this is where we're learning from our peers. And sometimes it may be formal. It may be, you know, we could say that today being on this webinar is a form of social learning. We're seeing a lot of interaction and chatting going on in the chat, which is fantastic. Everyone's kind of maybe sharing resources at some point or sharing their thoughts on different things. So there's a degree of social learning occurring right now during this talk. But we also have social learning occurring where there may be times where we're having meetings with our colleagues and someone just happens to mention some new way that they have approached something at work, or they've tried something new, or they're showing you something that they've been working on, and you kind of have that aha moment in the meeting where like, that's really cool, or they show you how to do it later. Those are examples of social learning. And one of the things that is difficult is that some of those experiences are really hard to capture in terms of measuring that data. And so while we'll be talking about metrics today, our goal is not to be proselytizing that we need to have metrics for every single learning experience that occurs in the workplace, because it's impossible to be able to do that. But just thinking about the different ways in which we can demonstrate as L&D professionals, when is social learning occurring in our workplace? And so some examples may be anytime if you have any online courses or instructor-led courses online, maybe you're seeing interactions occurring within the chat. That's showing when social learning is occurring. If you have community forums at work and people are sharing resources or they're responding to one another, that's showing employee to employer, peer-to-peer interactions, which can also demonstrate that social learning is occurring in the workplace. But again, I think when we look at all of these elements, obviously the easiest way to get formal learning in is looking at those metrics, because usually there's more formalized assessments as we're going through. But one of the biggest challenges that I think we still have in workplace learning is that 20%. And how do we account for that? How do we measure that? Sometimes we don't know that it's occurring when it's occurring. Perhaps we're the ones helping people and training people. We don't realize that that's occurring. We may be the learners and taking that for granted. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of that today. But what we'd like to do is just to kind of see, what are your thoughts? What are some of the ways you see social learning occurring in your organization? Please put that in the chat. We'd love to see what everyone else is doing. Yeah, I see mentoring new hires, absolutely. Slack discussions. Yeah, using team channels, we do that as well. Book clubs, networking, lunch and learns. And again, I saw someone posted earlier in the chat that one of the challenges with social learning is that it's so inconsistent, right? And we never know, sometimes we never know when it's going to occur. So it's very hard to plan for as well. I'm seeing a lot of things in the chat too about virtual experiences. And again, some organizations since COVID, we've seen a push for more virtual organizations where we don't always get to hang around the water cooler per se back at the office. And so again, how are we engaging our folks that way as well? Seeing group learning sessions, staff meetings, absolutely. And so this kind of segues into, when we think back to that 70% piece, this ongoing work. I'm in the middle of work and I need training or I need access to resources. And this is where we're starting to see more discussions being taken place, especially in the e-learning industry, about how can we support just-in-time learning. And so this is where it's really important for us to be thinking about anticipating our learners' needs. So this is where managers and supervisors can think about, what are some of those tasks that their employees typically struggle with? What are some of those infrequent tasks that maybe they only do once or twice a year and they might need a little bit of help or just a reminder? These are great examples of where we can see, where we can provide that just-in-time learning through a variety of different methods, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. The other thing too, when we're thinking about just-in-time learning, is sticking with the necessities. And so if I'm at work and I am trying to do something with computer software, I don't necessarily need to see all kinds of friendly icebreakers and videos in that just-in-time learning. I really just need to stick with brass tacks and just show me how to do this task. Either walk me through it step by step. I'm an instructional designer by trade. I love a good task analysis where you're breaking it down. But again, really just focusing in on what do I absolutely need to know in that moment to complete that job. This also helps us reduce cognitive load and supports problem solving by not having as many extras in that training, because again, the intended purpose for this just-in-time learning is just to stick with those specific points, keep it short and sweet, so that the employee, the learner, can continue proceeding on with that task. And so if you were to think about if you were working in manufacturing and somebody was teaching you how to operate a machine and they're showing you something on the spot, they're not necessarily going to stop and lead a 1-hour class for you in that moment. They're going to focus in on what's the task that you're asking or you're needing assistance with, and they're going to pinpoint exactly what you need to do in those moments to make sure that you're operating that machinery safely. The other thing to be thinking about with just-in-time learning, though, as L&D professionals, is thinking about accessibility in mind. And so thinking about how are people going to be interacting with that content? Where are they going to be accessing it? And so is it somebody going to be accessing that content or those just-in-time resources from their desk at a computer? Are we talking about individuals that may be working on the floor or out in the field? I've seen a few comments in the chat about construction and manufacturing. And so again, thinking about how are our learners going to be accessing this content? Where are they going to be in that moment when they need those just-in-time supports? And so our next slide kind of covers micro learnings, and I'll pass that over to Kylie.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really important, I think, as L&D professionals, that we're being involved in these conversations around and assessing these with our stakeholders and with our leadership around the methods may change based off the team, based off the industry that you're in, of course, and really knowing like how you can contribute to this just-in-time learning. So formats for microlearning, these are just some of the things, that we kind of talk about, especially at Litmos. In most of these, I wouldn't expect to be a surprise to this group as I'm looking at this chat as well. Video clips, I think one of the biggest methods I see these days are people just going to YouTube real quick and clicking on a quick YouTube video or other types of videos that we may have created for our team, that might be specific to our product or to our company as well. But the interactive video and learning through video in a very quick, succinct way. I just need a quick 1 minute, 2 minute video on how to do is a very, I think, well-known micro learning at this point. Of course, you can have those infographics and those kind of one-pagers. I think I saw a couple people putting some of those in the chat as well. Quick how-to guides or reference guides when it comes to, finding something quickly. I think it's important that we also enable our organization to know where to find these. And so there is, the importance of creating or having, micro learning available for our team, but if they don't know where to find it or they're struggling to find it, like that's something for us to consider. How are we getting that information out there, communicating where they can go to find it? Are you, again, an on-site organization? Are you hybrid? Are you fully remote? And so is it, a SharePoint site or a Teams site or whatever you're saying, or an email that you've sent, making sure that you're having a program in place and awareness for your managers and for your employees to understand where to go to find, these quick kind of reference guides or other types of learning, I think is extremely important. Podcasts, one of my favorites, podcasts, a lot of micro learning. What I like about it, you can also do it on the go, right? And so you don't have to be sitting sometimes at your desk, depending on your type of role or what you have that's maybe mobile that you can walk with as well. And so podcasts for me is a quick, easy one that I do on the way to, personally for me, school pickup. Driving to school, coming back from school, listening to a podcast, right? So ways in which we can get information there, and whether that's just information that you know are interested in yourself, or things that are very specific to your role or to your company or to your industry. There's tons of variety out there. Interactive simulations. So Jill and I were talking a little bit about this earlier. So, maybe you're going through an actual e-learning type of material or training, and it's telling you how to, click here, and then you have to go and click there, and then you do this, and then you click there. So making sure you're going through interactive, or what we've seen, these days is maybe you have to answer questions in a chat in an e-learning, or a way in which you're engaging again with this type of training that is getting you a little bit more hands-on, part of the process, learning through doing a little bit more. We have our, sorry. Go back real quick. Our print-based materials as well. I think a lot of us are very aware of, the instruction manual, or anything else that kind of goes along with how to do this, in still print-based as well. And again, depending on your organization, your company, kind of your industry, having more access or less access to print-based materials as well. And then what we talked about a little bit earlier around e-learning, and also as it relates to interactive simulations, e-learning modules that we have access to today as well. And then one that we, again, leverage at Litmos that I like a lot around kind of micro-learning are these condensed book summaries. And there's a couple of different companies out there that do these types of condensed book summaries, but taking maybe like an Adam Grant book, or, any book that's maybe recently come out, and they summarize the book into 3 to 4 to 5 kind of pages for you. And so, an example of this would be like a Blinkist book summary. Those, I think, and we have access to at Litmos as well, are really great ways to just digest quickly, some information out there instead of reading the full book. So an example that we like to leverage, and I like to leverage personally. Okay. Now I'm ready, Jill.
Yeah, sorry.
I just have lots to talk about. All right. So, and I'd be happy to again, micro learnings, a little bit of the similar to social learning, putting in the chat kind of what you're all doing as well. I think is great to kind of see. So feel free to continue to put in the chat. All right, so moving on to knowledge acquisition metrics. So some of the types of processes that we talk about when we're looking to understand the participants' knowledge or skills that they've acquired after going through this training program or process. And so I think we're all familiar with pre and post assessments. This is really just measuring the change in knowledge or skills from before you implement the training or implement the program, and then do the similar survey afterwards and see, what's changed. Self-reported learning, again, this is, very much just around the participants themselves, rating their perceived learning experience, and then knowledge retention. So very standard that we see, especially in e-learning these days, are tests or quizzes that we administer after. But really where you can do this as well is have a little bit of delay in learning. So we talk about, like, you maybe have gone through the course and then a follow-up, maybe a week to 2 weeks, or how are you kind of following up with that? Maybe not right after the course has happened, or you do so, but then a couple of weeks later as well, to look at retention of the knowledge. And so really thinking about how you're implementing that throughout the programs that you're building as well. Jill, anything else you would add to this slide?
Yeah, I was just going to say just a few comments just in general about metrics, because I was seeing in the chat earlier, we noticed that the majority of folks today mentioned that there's a challenge with how we measure the impact of our L&D efforts. And I think that that's not unique to any organization. I think that that's something when Kylie and I, we talked to a lot of different L&D professionals and HR professionals, and gathering those metrics on learning is really difficult. Oftentimes, and I saw this coming up in the chat earlier today as well, there's challenges around it with, when we're talking about L&D budgets with leadership and trying to show what is our impact on the organization, how are we supporting the organization's strategic goals. And one of the challenges is that when we look at these knowledge acquisition metrics, which are great, this only accounts for, if we go back to that 70-20-10 framework, only that 10% of the formal learning, because it's really difficult to be able to gather some of those other metrics with some of those other formats that we know are typically occurring within the workplace, especially as individuals are learning in the flow of work. And so I'm not saying that we don't get rid of these. We still report on these. We still report on how many employees, I know sometimes it feels like that checkbox, how many, I know it drives Kylie nuts, how many employees have participated in training. We still need to include those metrics, but we need to think about ways in which we can present our metrics. We can present L&D as if we're telling a story to leadership to try and demonstrate our worth to the overall organization's goals. And so some of the different ways that we're also looking at this is, in addition to your knowledge acquisition metrics, also looking at your job performance metrics, because again, this is where we're going to start looking at on the job evaluations. What are some ways we can determine what learning needs are, as well as how are learners or employees progressing over the year? And so when we think about on-the-job evaluations, this could be impromptu or in situ evaluations that are occurring. Perhaps you've got a new employee and you're just checking in, you're just seeing how things are going. Maybe you're the supervisor and you're giving some support on how to complete a task. So it can be a little bit more informal in that sense, or it may be coming down to, you know, some of those annual reviews where you're going in with your employees and talking about their performance over time. This also gives us a great opportunity to touch base with our employees, especially those that are working on the front line, to figure out what are their needs, what are the realities of their jobs, what would they appreciate support in. And so when you think about, especially when I think about healthcare and clinicians, if I'm thinking about employees working in factories or in manufacturing or out in the field for manufacturing, where they might not be working a desk job per se, or perhaps there's other things going on in their work environment that doesn't allow for them to be sitting at a desk and participating in trainings for extended periods of time. It's these types of on-the-job evaluations and check-ins that can also give you some insights on this too. And so again, this is where we can kind of start looking at identifying what might be needed for those on-the-job micro learning formats, those job aids, finding out what types of support. So when we think about the ways in which we engage in our, setting our annual goals, perhaps with our managers or supervisors, and then think about what resources or training would I benefit from so that I can be most successful at accomplishing those goals. Those are ways we can kind of weave L&D into the flow of those conversations as well. We can also start looking at other metrics, productivity, looking at speed, accuracy, volume of completed work, looking at how many, are we seeing differences in the number of errors that are occurring? Are we seeing differences in terms of time on task in certain industries? And again, it depends on what the industry is. It depends on what the department is. But these are different ways too that we can show L&D is contributing to these metrics and these improvements within our organization. And then lastly, we have customer satisfaction. And so this could be thinking about, who are your constituents? Who are your stakeholders that benefit from the goods and services that your organization is providing? And so the feedback that you can gather from them also can provide insights into what trainings we might want to be offering in the future, what types of resources from an L&D standpoint do we want to provide our employees so that they can be most successful in their roles within the organization. But it's also a good indicator to let our leadership know when something's going well within the organization. And I think one of the biggest challenges, especially when we talk about ROI, in L&D, is that it is really hard to isolate events and say, because these employees participated in this training, this is why we're experiencing so much success with our overall business. But I think if we frame it in a way of that we're telling a story about what the evaluation metrics we have available to us, that helps to kind of provide that bigger picture and show where L&D's role is in helping to support those activities and facilitate those activities. And so when we get into this calculating the overall ROI in L&D, this is where we're typically seeing, again, thinking back to those performance appraisals. So when we're talking to those individuals working on the front line, asking them what do they need, what would be most helpful, tying in L&D into those key performance indicators. And so when we're identifying what are those metrics that are being linked to an individual's role or department's goals, thinking about how can L&D be leveraged to support that. And maybe that also involves some informal, again, we're going to bring in some social learning within our department meetings. Maybe it's not just a one-on-one with you and your supervisor. Perhaps it's your team or it's your department talking openly about what are our goals for this upcoming year and what types of resources and L&D would we benefit from. And maybe it's figuring out who in your department has the expertise in certain tasks that now you have a contact to go to if you need assistance. But again, thinking about those types of things. And then again, not limiting the types of feedback we provide our employees or our learners, not limiting it to just that annual performance appraisal, but thinking about what are the different ways in which we're giving and receiving feedback as both managers and supervisors, as well as learners and employees within the organization. And so again, looking at all of those different types of things, this allows us to start thinking about what types of social learning, on-the-job learning, informal learning occurs.
And I think, Jill, really quick, if we can go back to that other slide. An example as well, when I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat just around like the business, the business metrics, kind of what are their outcomes, like how are we working with the business on making sure we're tied. I think one, we as L&D professionals, or whatever kind of role you're in within the organization, should be very aware of what your goals for the organization are for the year or for the 3 to 5 years. And so, is it an increase in revenue by X%? Is it an increase in customer retention by X%? Is it is it around product, getting X amount of product out the door, or executing on certain, product roadmap initiatives? And then what are those skills that we need kind of tied to those roles to make that successful? And so when I think about a program around onboarding, for example, how quickly are you getting people up and ramped and going in your sales organization? What is the ramp time? How are you contributing to maybe the global onboarding program and to the functional onboarding program for maybe some key revenue generation type roles at your company? Because those roles being up and running quickly are those the ones that are going to have that immediate impact on your bottom line of your organization. And so if you maybe need a place to start taking a look at some of those revenue generation type roles within your organization. And so I think measure your onboarding program as well. And so as you're kind of going through the pre-onboarding process and the experience that people are getting prior to day one, and then how are you measuring that? Are you doing a 1 week, 4 week, whatever sort of 30, 60, 90-day follow-up with your individuals who are coming on board? And how are you sharing that feedback back with your organization around the results you're getting for your onboarding survey? Did I have the right tools to do my job? Did I have anyone who helped me learn my role if I'm in a virtual environment? And so really making sure that you're measuring, you can measure through onboarding programs, you can measure through, those feedback surveys through, maybe you put those in place for onboarding, measure through, measuring through your engagement surveys, I think, are really important as well. Do I have access to L&D? Do I feel like I have the skills I need in my role? Do I feel like there is ample time for me to support around learning and development initiatives or through the flow of work, since we all know we don't have a lot of time to set aside separately for formal training? And so how are you working with other teams as well to get those questions, those measurements into other types of initiatives that you may have going on at your company as well, so you can get some of those metrics and get some of that information? What is your new hire attrition? Those who have been with the company maybe less than 6 months or 1 year, and why are they attriting? Is it, again, something to do with how we're onboarding our employees? What do our new hire sales performance metrics look like? Again, for ramp time, is there any sort of like pre or post, or how you're looking at your ramp time for how quickly they're getting up and running in their functional onboarding training? So some of these things I think are just really important to make sure that you're engaged with the stakeholders who are driving that, to really demonstrate your value and taking that information back to your leadership teams around, here's what I'm seeing in the trend data, and here's where I think we may need to pivot as well. So just an example around maybe onboarding as it relates to getting feedback. The other thing I would talk about here would be like individual development plans. And so maybe you're not owning that directly in L&D, but I think a key component of creating individual development plans is, what training do people have available, or access do they have available resources that they're incorporating in their IDPs, and how are we sharing, maybe we don't have a really big budget to go out and do X, Y, Z, but here are some micro learnings or free resources or things that we've built for our teams that you can incorporate into your IDPs, and making sure we're connecting on that, or the program we've built around, talent management, I think is really important as well. I'm getting behind in the chat, so if there's anything there, Jill, feel free.
Yeah, I saw something in here just asking about what are some suggestions for for soft skills training. How can we show that story with communication skills beyond going through perhaps the formal training modules, where you've got some of those initial metrics or assessments where were they paying attention in the moment they were completing perhaps the e-learning module, or whatever the training format may be. But if we think about, and again, kind of going back to the 70-20-10 model, the social learning, perhaps it's looking at utilizing 360-degree feedback within your department, and saying, we've gone through this communication training, where are we seeing improvements within our department, and again, it can be broadly for that department, talking about that holistically. Those can be examples of ways in which you can start noting changes. Perhaps it's having customers sending in feedback and comments on what their interactions have been when they're interacting with your employees. Again, we can also start looking at ways in which we can be accounting for communication and gathering feedback, especially that qualitative feedback during those performance appraisals and individualized plans. And so again, metrics do not have to always be, I know, unless there's any quantitative researchers here, metrics can also be qualitative. I think it's good to have that mix, right? Where we've got those numbers, but it's that qualitative data that I think is really rich, that helps to tell that story, to support what we're seeing in those reports. And so I think that those are different things that we can be looking at as well. And again, think about the ways in which we paint that story. But if there's one takeaway today with our talk, it's just thinking about your own learning experiences as individuals, but also thinking about what's occurring within your organizations today. If we're looking at this 70-20-10 model, and I think most organizations tend to do a decent job with that 10% formal learning, but it's like, how do we account for and provide sufficient support and necessary support for that 70% that's occurring on the job, in the flow of work? And then again, how are we gathering information to know when social learning is occurring, but also creating opportunities to foster social learning within a variety of different means, whether it's through Slack channels, whether it's through group meetings, whether it's through more facilitated mentorship programs within our organization. And so if we just kind of think about this as you're telling your L&D story, thinking about what this might look like.
Yeah, and I think, Jill, a couple of, and I saw these in the chat, and I think they're really great to kind of reiterate around social learning, especially for those of you who may be in virtual or hybrid environments, or a big virtual component of your organization. How are you building that sense of community where we don't necessarily have, again, those water cooler moments where we can just, quickly ask a question or hop over to someone's desk or whatever to get an answer? It has to be either a little bit more formal with a set up meeting or a call, or maybe we just felt like, I don't want to interrupt someone, so I'm not going to ask. And so it's really important, I think, in these virtual environments as well, to double down on creating those moments for people. So for example, at Litmos, during our onboarding program, we have we're rolling out assigned buddy programs for what we consider our culture ambassador individuals who are part of our culture ambassador program are assigned as onboarding buddies for our new hires. So they're not just, the only person they meet is not just their manager, but someone else who's really a culture ambassador for the organization, and just a quick another point of contact for them. So a formal program around that. I think it's also, we have very structured, we're a virtual, fully remote organization. So we have very structured all manager meetings where we break out into small groups. And so, maybe managers who don't interact on a day-to-day basis with each other will break down some of those silos, cross collaboration, get to meet each other and problem solve some of the questions that we put out there for our managers every month to 2 months as well. We also host lunch and learns actually with Dr. Jill every month, for our employees to join and ask questions, L&D questions to Dr. Jill. And, again, rating how many people are attending these, how many are attending, but asking questions and not just not just listening or maybe in the background. We also, in our organization, have a Teams channel, a general channel for, questions. Quick question for anyone in the company: do they know the answer to XYZ? And you see so much at our company engagement in that channel around just, yeah, let me help you, let me connect you, let me figure out who can help you with XYZ. And so really making sure, again, that you're part of that solution around some of this social learning, especially in places where we have to be a lot more intentional about it. In that we're, I think really just engaging with our employees around who needs what, when, why, how, and then, if we want to measure it in things such as the attendance or, interaction, question answers, that sort of thing, I think that's great. But creating those moments, I think, are really important. And then the one other thing I know I mentioned earlier, and we're running out of time, is just there is so much that can be done around building really great training, really great programs, really great, knowledge resources, really great communities. But if people don't know where to access them, don't know about them, or we're not getting the right information at the right time to people, consider your strategy around how you're rolling out these programs or these resources, or training maybe your manager population or your employee population on knowing where those are, because there's nothing like wasting all this time to put something together that we think is super great and then no one knows about it.
And I know we're limited on time, but we've got a couple of questions which I think we can get through. One of the questions we were asked is, we struggle with getting onboarding evaluations returned at all. Are there recommendations on how to improve the volume of feedback? One of the things that I think that can help is communicating to people ahead of time how that information is going to be used, and then following up. I saw someone put in that chat earlier about measuring and assessing and sharing. And I think it's how many times have we filled out surveys and we never find out what it was used for or what's going to be done afterwards. And so I think communicating what those goals are and why that information is so important and how it's going to be relayed back to your employees is also, I think, really important. Kylie, I think we have time for one more question, which is, what are some best practices to determine how much of our stakeholders' department KPIs were positively impacted by our learning programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you have to start off from the strategy from the beginning. Like, what are we trying to solve for from a business perspective? And where does learning and training come in to help solution? And so starting from the beginning around, again, what are we trying to solve for? Is it retention? Is it skills? Is it time to ramp? What exactly are we going after? And then what are kind of our pre and post kind of metrics that we want to start looking at for baseline? I think I saw in the chat, a lot of these metrics are not are a long-term game, right? We're not here 1 month later and can say we did this and here's the outcome around this program we created. Like, it's a long-term play, like 30, 60, 90, a year around like what we've put into practice, I think is something that we can't lose sight of, especially when we're looking at behavioral changes or upskilling individuals. It takes time. And so being involved in those conversations conversations with stakeholders from the beginning, I think is really important around what we're trying to solve, and then how can we do that collectively together.
But thank you very much for everyone who's attended today. Feel free to connect with myself or Kylie on LinkedIn. We're happy to engage in these conversations with everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys were awesome. I was struggling to keep up with the chat and you were multitasking, but this was an amazing conversation. Great comments. This was fabulous, ladies. Thank you so much for that. And for everyone else, we are right at time. So we are going to take that 15-minute break for our next session. We have Kelly Lake joining us from SweetRush, a strategic approach to modernize workforce measurement transformation. So in a moment, I'm going to end the session and you can join our next session by returning to the event lobby and going to the session tab. So please stick around for our next session, which will begin at the top of the hour. Bye, everybody.